Welcome to Film and Page. I'm Dominic. In this video, I'll be ranking the 7 Resident Evil books by author S.D. Perry. These books were published from 1998 to 2004, and this was a series of books that I didn't know about until I found one in a used bookstore sometime back around 2010. Since then, I've hunted down most of the series in used bookstores and thrift shops, with the exception of Code Veronica. That one has eluded me. Now, Resident Evil is my favorite all-time video game franchise, and the one in the series that hooked me was Part 2 for the original PlayStation. It was the first game in the series I played. It's also the one I've played the most, with Part 5 being the last one I played and the one that made me lose interest in the series for over a decade. I've recently been playing Resident Evil Village, and I have to say that has been fun so far. During the void when I wasn't playing these games, I was hunting down and reading the books by S.D. Perry. Over the years, there have been a lot of attempts to adapt these games to the big screen. A Netflix series, a series of animated films. With the exception of the animated films, these attempts have been disappointing, in my opinion anyway. However, the best adaptation of these games, again in my opinion, are these series of paperback novels. I'm pretty nostalgic about these games, especially the first 3. And when I was reading these books, it brought it all back, all the fun feelings I had when I originally played these games. I was right back in the late 90s and early 2000s. That is something none of the screen adaptations have ever come close to doing. As far as a series of books go, this is a very good and entertaining series, with only one dud, which isn't bad. I really enjoyed reading these books, and if you're a reader along with being a fan of these games, this series would be a must-read, I would think. However, physical copies of these books are hard to come by these days. As much as I love this series and recommend it, like any series, it has its peaks and valleys. Now with all that said, let's get into the video. Starting things off, right at the bottom of the barrel is Resident Evil Underworld, published in 1999 and is the 4th book in the series. Also, it is an original story and not based on a game. This is the weakest book in the series by far, and was the only one that I really didn't enjoy all that much. I didn't find the story very interesting, or the main antagonist Trent wasn't a strong villain. I really don't know exactly why I didn't like this one, but the story felt small and in a location that wasn't that exciting. It took me a while to get through this one, despite it not having a large page count. The best way I can sum up the experience reading this book is like this. You hear about a new movie coming out, a big action-adventure one, with a star-studded cast and large budget. So you go see it, and you have a blast. You can't wait for the sequel. Then 5 or 6 years roll by, and you're in Walmart one day, then you come across the sequel. But it's straight to video, has a bunch of actors you've never heard of, and has a fraction of the budget the first one did. That was this book. Moving on, we have Resident Evil Code Veronica, published in 2001. And is the 6th book in the series. Now, as I said, these books are very good adaptations of the games, so much so that it brought me right back to when I originally played them, which in this book's case wasn't a good thing, because when it comes to the games, I never really cared for Code Veronica. That pretty much carried over to the book. The novelization didn't elevate the story from the game, in my opinion. I don't know if that makes sense or not. It wasn't a bad read, unlike Underworld, but it wasn't great either. It was a mid-read, and that's why I ranked it so low. As a side note, this is the only one in the series I have not found a physical copy of yet, so I had to settle on the ebook to continue reading the series. Next up, we have Resident Evil Zero Hour, published in 2004. It is the 7th book and final book in the series, and is a prequel to the first book in the series. It is also based on the game of the same name. Resident Evil Zero was one of the Resident Evil games I never played, so I wasn't familiar with the storyline, but as far as the series of books go, it works pretty good as a prequel to the first book in the series, despite S.D. Perry playing it fast and loose with the canon established in the books. It introduces some new characters I wasn't familiar with, while bringing in ones I were, like Wesker and William Birkin. It's also the 2nd book that has Rebecca Chambers as the main protagonist. I enjoyed this one quite a bit, and I liked it that it fleshed out the character of Rebecca Chambers a bit more for me. However, having a prequel as the final book in a series I did find a bit odd, as it doesn't close off the series, which makes me wonder if more books were planned and then the plug got pulled. Next on the list is another story with Rebecca Chambers as the main protagonist, Resident Evil Caliban Cove, published in 1998, and is the second book in the series. This book, like Underworld, is an original story and is not based on a game. It is set between the events of Resident Evil 1 and 2. With this book being the first original story, I was a bit skeptical going into it, but it was a fun read that expands the Rebecca Chambers character. Also, a great setting for the story with a lighthouse that leads into a secret research facility connected by sea caves, and the shell of a sunken ship. What I also like about this book is that it gives more of a link between the events of Resident Evil 1 and 2, which the games really don't, or only very loosely do. So this book fills in that gap of time between the games, even if the books differ in timeline events from the games themselves. A much better original story than Underworld. Now we are heading into the top 3 with Resident Evil Nemesis, originally published in 2000 and is the 6th book in the series. Resident Evil Nemesis was the second Resident Evil game that I played and owned. A game, while not as good as Part 2, was still a lot of fun to play. SD Perry was able to very effectively translate that fun over to the novelization, with the only exception is that the story seemed grander and larger when I played the game than it did in the novelization. Now that just might be my memory playing tricks on me. Resident Evil Nemesis has my second favorite character in the games, Jill Valentine. When I saw that first Resident Evil movie in the theaters back in 2002, I thought Mila Jovovich was playing Jill Valentine, and that she would be the central character in the film series. Instead, she played Alice, some original character with no ties to the game that director Paul W.S. Anderson pulled out of his ass. It also has my favorite monster of the entire series, Nemesis. In the number 2 spot, we have Resident Evil City of the Dead, the novelization of Resident Evil 2, originally published in 1999 and is the 3rd book in the series. When it comes to the games, Resident Evil 2 is my favorite game in the series, with Resident Evil 4 coming in second, and both games feature my favorite character, Leon Kennedy. One thing about Resident Evil 2 I always loved is the story of the game. When I played it years ago, it really pulled me in, and I absolutely loved the setting of the game in the police station, along with the seductive and mysterious character, Ada Wong. So it made such a natural fit when adapted into a novel. It came very close to capturing the awesomeness of the game. I had a blast reading this book, and it brought me right back to the game. However, there is one book on this list that does it even more. And that book is number 1 on this list, Resident Evil: The Umbrella Conspiracy, the novelization of the first Resident Evil game, and is naturally the first book in the series, originally published in 1998. Even though Resident Evil 2 is my favorite game in the series, and the first game is like my 3rd or 4th, the novelization of its story is by far my favorite when it comes to these books. The reason being is that Resident Evil was actually the 3rd game I played in the series. I had already rolled over Part 2 a few times and had completed Part 3. So when I got to the first game, it felt a bit flat, because it was a step back in graphics. Also, the voice acting, as any fan of the series knows, is really bad in that first game, which distracts you from the game's story and holds it back a bit. Now, don't get me wrong, I had a lot of fun playing this first game. However, what makes the novelization so good and why it's my favorite book in the series is because SD Perry perfectly captures all the nostalgic feelings I have for that first game and fun I had playing it. But she also manages to elevate the story above the game, with all the horrible dialogue and voice acting eliminated. Now you just have the story to focus on, and your imagination can create visuals that far surpass the original game. So that's why I ranked it number 1 in this series of books. That is my ranking of the Resident Evil series of books by author S.D. Perry, a very fun and entertaining series of books. It took me several years to acquire these paperbacks as I couldn't get any of them new. However, I do believe they are all available in ebook format. So if you decide to read the series, that will be your best bet to find them. And that's everything I have to say in this video. Let me know what you think in the comments section, and I will see you at the next one. I'd like to say thank you to all of my subscribers. I appreciate you all in helping this channel grow. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, don't forget to hit the bell icon so you'll be notified when new videos are uploaded.